Hello, Technology Accelerators, and welcome to another session on how to accelerate your technology projects. And today we're building on the last session I did around selecting an ERP for your business and selecting the right ERP. And today we're going to dive into how to kick off your ERP project for success, how to do it in the right way. So this is a topic near and dear to my heart. I've worked on many ERP projects and learned so much from these projects because they are intense, lots going on, typically a long duration, often multi-years, big teams, big budgets, complex, and involve lots of different departments in a company. So they are a lot of fun, they're a lot of stress, they're a lot of learning. And so what I wanted to do today was share some of my lessons learned, some of my war stories, so you can use these on your future ERP projects and hopefully give you some insights to make your future ERP projects go smoother. So let me just I'm just following along the questions here. Got a couple of questions come in already around lessons learned and what to do there. So I'm going to make sure I cover those. But in the meantime, let's dig into it. So as I said, this is all around how to set up your project for your ERP project for success. And I'm going to start with my what most people don't do, my lessons learned, what most people miss on ERP projects. So let's dive into it. So the first thing that I want to list off 5 key learnings about what most people miss on ERP projects. And this is really, really important based on what I've seen around from my experience running ERP projects when I was with the Big Four consulting and run it for ERP for energy clients, oil and gas, financial services, and manufacturing clients. So the first thing I'm going to kick off with is around what most people miss is around agile delivery. And you're probably saying, John, why would you miss agile delivery? And most projects should be agile or could be agile. And what the point I want to make here is that most people miss the fact that just assuming a project is agile is going to answer all their questions and all their problems. When in reality, what most people miss about agile projects is scope and change management of scope. So when you engage a vendor to help with an ERP project, because typically you will have a vendor involved. These are large, complex projects with big system changes. So the vendor's going to help, and they're invaluable, really good partners in delivering ERP projects. But what I find is that there tends to be an approach to say, let's make sure this project is agile, which means we get through the first design phase, sometimes call it the blueprinting, and sometimes call that initial requirements phase quite quickly, because the intent is to get into the build as quickly as possible. That's true agile, is let's get into the build, let's do an MVP, let's get something out the door quickly to show to our clients. But what people miss is the fact that this scope that we define up front in this blueprinting or initial requirements is absolutely critical to managing the budget and time and effort later on in the project. So what I see is during this agile upfront blueprinting stage is that we tend to not get into the detail we need to. And as a result, once we get into building out the configuration, the processes, and the changes needed on the ERP application, is it quickly runs into change requests. There's extra scope, extra reports, or extra business process, or a different approval flow that we need to account for. And this results in change requests, which results in more budget, and suddenly your scope and budget balloons, and that impacts sometimes schedule as well. So the first thing not to miss on an ERP project is that the jumping into delivery too quickly around agile. Agile is great. I love agile, but please, please, please remember to do detailed planning up front. It's a bit painful. It takes a lot of time, but it's well worth it because you're setting that baseline scope for the future to make sure you manage cost later on. So that's the first thing that people miss when they get into the ERP projects. The second is the vendor schedule. So again, I'm not saying people miss the vendor schedule, but there's one key thing that I see a lot of ERP projects miss about the vendor schedule. So when you engage the vendor to help with your ERP delivery, they'll bring their experience, their expertise. They've done this hundreds of times. They have access to a lot of other people who've done this before. And that's hugely helpful. Bringing a schedule from the vendor to help deliver your ERP is really accelerates the project. But the key thing that people miss is they often assume that standard template, standard timelines applies to your specific company and project. So the thing that people miss is to just challenge some of those standard durations. So, for example, I was working on ERP recently, and the standard move to production timeline was 1 month. So, once you've done all the configuration, testing, signed off, migrated all the data, then there's a move to production where the test environment or the final config goes to the production environment. That standard duration is 1 month. But that what we found is it actually didn't take 1 month. It actually only took about 10 days, actual duration, but the schedule had 1 month. So we could actually use that time for more testing. So my challenge back to the vendor was, let's reduce that month back to what it should be, which is the 10 days. Still allows some contingency. So we actually did it in 2 weeks instead of the 10 days, but we didn't allow a month. But the going in position was the month is the standard. So my point around what people miss is that you always need to just check those standard durations and then apply what makes sense to your project. The other thing to note as well is deadlines, milestones. These vendor schedules are awesome for setting up the plan in terms of the key milestones, but make sure you plan towards that. What are the tasks leading up to those key tasks? So, for example, the last one we had a data migration date. The data migration during the cutover or leading up to the cutover of our ERP wasn't fully estimated when we put the plan together, because the vendor said this is the standard duration it takes and this is the fixed duration along with all the other milestones. So I challenged that. I pushed back and said, okay, let's understand exactly how long our data migration would take. And that actually adjusted the timeline slightly to have a more realistic. So again, vendor information is awesome, really good to start with, but just do the validation up front on the schedule. Third point is the sponsor or sponsors engagement. So again, everyone would always say, oh yeah, John, we always engage sponsors. They're involved throughout. They're looking in, watching over the project. We meet them on the steering committee. My point is meet them often. And you probably think that often might be once a month or maybe even every 6 weeks. I see every 2 months sometimes, or even a quarter. And that's just not enough on an ERP project, especially towards the last 4, 5, 6 months during when you get into testing, ending design, into testing, and then final build and cutover. You need to meet them weekly. I know that sounds a lot, but what a lot of people miss is how often they need to meet their sponsors. And this is really important, because the sponsors are the big advocate for your project, the ERP. They're promoting and marketing the ERP project within the company. And also, more importantly, they are paying for the project. So you need to make sure they're fully informed in everything that's going on. And also ask, what are they seeing? What are they feeling? What's most important to them? Ask, though, as a lead on the project, ask them what's most important to them right now, because they might be seeing other things going on in the company that will affect your ERP project. When I was going through this on a couple of projects ago, there was a lot of change going on in the company, including a merger and a divestiture at the same time, which was a huge amount of change. And that came in midway through the ERP project. We had no choice. It was a market decision from the board, so it was going ahead. As a result, my sponsor was really key in helping us make sure the resources were available. More importantly, what's the tone in the company? What's the messaging that's going out there? How does it affect our project? So we worked very closely together to make sure we were sending the right messaging around the merger and acquisition and the ERP project. And that helped with the change management. And one quick tip as well, meeting sponsors in the steering committee, always take notes, take actions. I know that sounds like bureaucracy and it might be a bit of a pain, but it's so important. I can't remember the amount of times when we've made a decision through a steering committee early in the project to then 3-6 months later revisit that decision. And fortunately, because we had notes in the steering committee meeting minutes, we could go back and refer to that decision made, because people forget, people get busy, lots of things changes, people change, roles change. So always have the notes from your meetings with your steering committee and your sponsors, and share it with them as well. This is just saying, hey, this is the notes I captured. So number 4, integrations. Why would you miss integrations? You're not going to miss integrations. Of course you're not. But what you need to remember about integrations, it's not just about the configuration change. There's often vendors involved, particularly when you're linking your ERP to another system. Maybe it's a payroll system, or maybe an asset management system, or maybe it's an HR system or finance system. There's the various different systems that you're connecting to. The vendors of those systems may need to sign off that integration change. I know, believe it or not, even though you're just making that change internally, the vendor of the receiving system may have to go through their own sign-off process. And believe me, when I've done that with an HR ERP implementation and we had to integrate with the various banks for the payroll, the bank sign-off process is unbelievably slow and complicated. It's unfortunately just, it is what it is. So as I went through it with my last ERP, I allow plenty of time for the sign-off of the integration with the banking vendor. So just remember to add that to your schedule when you're going through the sign-off, because not only do you need the functional testing sign-off, you'll also need the vendor potentially to sign off that integration as well. So that's around integration. That's why that's really, really important. And then lastly, number 5, change management. Again, we all do change management, we all do communication, we all do training, but the thing we miss is how much change management we need to do. It always surprises me how much we need to do, and I always make sure we allow plenty of time, and I have a full staff team for change management. So I have a change management lead, at least 2, depending on the size of the project, it could be up to 2 or 3 change management analysts working with the change management lead, reporting to me as the project lead. It's not enough just to do regular communication once a week or once a month and some training and be done. ERPs are massive changes. When you're thinking about, even if it's a very simple system to use, a lot of the cloud-based ERPs are very intuitive, very easy to use, but it's still a change to users. It's still a change to how they do things. And much as we like to do training well in advance before we go live, people aren't just not interested until close to go live. They're busy. So you've got to make sure you do training as 6-8 months ahead of the go live, and then make sure they've got training support all the way up to go live, and then at least a month, if not 2 months after go live as well. Give them plenty of opportunity to attend training sessions, drop-ins, record the training sessions so people can see that. Then give them a mix of different ways to do it. Maybe it's online, maybe it's attending it in person, maybe it's remote live workshops, maybe it's just a Q&A. Maybe they're involved in some of the testing and UAT. There's various different ways to get people involved in using the new system, and all of that adds up to that successful change management. And by the way, don't forget about your own team as well. Just on this change management topic, we often think about end users, but remember the change within your own project team needs to be managed as well. ERPs are hard. Lots of work, especially burning the midnight oil during testing. It's just inevitable. It's no matter how much planning you do, there's always going to be emergencies coming up, issues needed to resolve. Some of the team end up working really, really hard. So recognize them. Do success rewards, spot rewards during the project. I would do pop quizzes during the team meetings. I'd offer a $5 Starbucks voucher for a pop quiz question during the team meetings. And one of our team building exercises was actually a fried chicken taste off, because there was a big debate halfway through the project about which is the best fried chicken in town. So it got to the point where I said, right, okay, fine. Every Tuesday lunchtime, we're going to bring in a different fried chicken and we can then do a vote on it. And again, it was a great little team building exercise, because not everyone wants to go to a bar, and everyone wants to go bowling, and they're great team building, but then do smaller ones like just getting together over lunch, for example, or doing a quick quiz online. Anonymous polling as well is also really good. So lots to share on that, and I'll do a much more deeper dive on some of these aspects, some of these topics later on, but those are the 5 that you must not miss when you're doing the ERP projects, around how you approach your agile delivery and the blueprinting up front, the vendor schedule, the sponsor engagement, the integration management, especially on vendors, and also the change management of your team, the project team, and also the end users. So with that, let's move on to the next section, which is then more importantly, given these lessons learned, how do you then set up your ERP project for success? So let's talk about how we set up your ERP project for success. So I always use a standard way for all my projects because it's tried and proven, and a true way of really setting up your project in the right way. And there are a number of steps. So let's dig into it. The first one is making sure you have the right priority for the project up front, but then also during the project as well, because people get busy, lots going on. Everyone gets excited about the new project at the beginning, but then what happens is as they carry on over several months or sometimes years, other projects come along. People start getting burnt out. People start getting tired. So make sure that priority of the project in the organization is still there all the way through the project delivery, not just up front. And that has to be made clear so everyone's time is freed up to work on the project. So that's the first thing to do. And you can only do that with your sponsor and your steering committee. So make sure it's prioritized within the company in the right way. Then be clear on the goals and the OKRs or objectives and key results. The key word there is results. What outcomes are you going to create with your project, the ERP? As a result of doing this, what's the benefit? And this will be different for different people. So the benefit for the sponsor, for the users, for the finance team, for the HR team, it's going to be different. They might be onboarding resources quicker as a result of the ERP. Payroll might have less checking, might go smoother for the finance team. Either way, you want to have those goals and OKRs messaged in a way that what's in it for them. And keep reminding your team throughout the project. Don't just set this up front and then file it away. This is done over and over and over again. And it might change during the project as well. Sometimes the benefits change as we adjust the scope of the project, or we find out new benefits we didn't realize about reporting, for example, extra reports we could use. Sometimes the vendor releases new functionality during the project. And that's always something we can add on to the project go live. So next, you take those goals and move them into the deliverables and scope. What are the milestones? What are these key things you're going to deliver? The scope of work you're going to do around the ERP and the functional changes you're going to make. Are you going to keep the configuration out of the box and not make any configuration or as little configuration changes as possible? Or are you going to, and that means you're going to adapt the business process, or are you going to adapt the system to work with your current business processes? Both are valid. I've seen both. I'm seeing more of a leaning towards the fact that we're adopting out of the box more and more, but that means a bigger internal change because typically companies worked a certain way for a long time and now they have to change. Or if you're changing the system to work with the business, that's a change to the configuration. Either way, it's change. Either way, it needs to be managed, but just be very, very clear on that. More importantly, out of scope. What are you not changing? Which interfaces, integrations, reports are you not changing? How many reports are you going to develop? Maybe there's a limit on 150 reports. Anything above that is out of scope. Be very, very clear on what you are doing for scope, and then more importantly, what you're not doing. Then once you have the goals, the schedule, the priority, and the scope, then you build the schedule. And this is a collaborative effort with the team, working through the key tasks and the activities you need to deliver those milestones and ultimately those results. So when we spoke before around making sure we have that vendor schedule, that's again really awesome to help build out that initial schedule, but then tune it, tweak it, bring in the vendors, bring in the partners, bring in the end users. What else is going on in the company? Is there any big events that are coming up in the midway through the project that you need to account for? Maybe it's going over the summer holidays. Vacation season is always just a challenge. Sometimes you may have to, it's a good idea to let people take vacations. Sometimes it gets hectic and you can't, and you have to put a freeze on holidays, and that's not ideal. But assume people will take vacations. So over the summer, it's going to be more people out of the office. Build that into your schedule. Then success sliders. So we're going to talk about that on the next page. If any of you have seen this before, seen my sessions before, I often talk about success sliders. They're awesome, really help streamline decision making, and we're going to talk about that on the next slide. Also, the team and the roles. What are the key team you need? So we've talked about deliverables and scope, schedule. are there any specific expertise, any resources, any system subject matter experts you need? Secure those people, typically around architecture, around payroll, around HR, some of the integration resources, test resources, the users as part of the acceptance testing. These are typical folks who are always very, very busy. There aren't many good people out there who know this system well. So make sure you identify them up front. And based on that, number one, they're the priority. Make sure you get them identified and then assigned to the project. And then lastly, as part of this setup, make sure you have the reporting and communication nailed down. So again, just go into it with, here's what we plan to do, and then let people know this plan. The amount of times I've seen projects create an awesome communication plan, but don't share it, which is ironic given it's called a communication plan. But the best thing you can do is to create a communication plan and then get input from everyone and anyone. Share it with the sponsors, the stakeholders, the key business users, the operational support folks, the technical folks. Just get everyone's input to see, okay, this is what we plan to do. Is there any key messaging that we need to add into and work into this to make it better? And that's hugely, hugely important. So that's how you set up your ERP project for success. Then the work ahead in terms of making sure it's delivered well. But before we get into that, what I want to talk about now is those success sliders. I mentioned that just a second ago. So let's talk about ERP project success sliders. So this, by the way, works for any project, but it's so, so important in terms of how you make decisions quickly because you're defining the success of the project up front. So you pick sliders. So each one of those, you'll see budget, schedule, quality, and scope. And for each one of those, you then decide if those criteria, those success items are fixed, as in we have to meet them, or maybe they're a bit more flexible. So for example, on budget, just going to draw on here as well. So for example, on budget, it's fixed. We have an absolute fixed budget that we have to work towards. Okay, good to know. We don't have flexibility in our budget, so that's where we'll put that. The schedule. So say we've got a very hard deadline that we have to meet. We have to meet that deadline of maybe it's end of year to work with the financial reporting or mid-year. Either way, there's a very specific deadline that we need to meet. Quality and scope. So are we going to do everything we said we were going to do, or is there going to be a bit of flexibility in some of the functionality? So there might be some key functionality we have to meet, but if push comes to shove, would we prioritize budget and schedule over some of the quality? So with ERPs, typically these are pretty high up on the fixed element. So maybe it's around here. Maybe it's just off the fixed. It's very important, but you have some flexibility in which scope you can maybe move from the to reduce the risk on schedule and budget. Then resources. So for example, if you're only relying on a very fixed team and you want to use as many of the company people as possible, not really relying on vendors, which can be a good idea to build the knowledge within the team, then it might be fixed. So it might be up here because you're just using the people in the company. However, that creates a bit of risk because you only have certain access to certain people. So what I'm going to do is, to take that out, just to delete that 1 second, get to the eraser. So, just move that down a bit. There we go. Okay, so what you can do is when it's fixed like that, you can actually start to work through how that would work with your project. So what you're seeing here is that we're starting to get a line here. You'll notice this line that's starting to move on this side here. That's creating a lot of risk in the project. And as a result, if it's more towards the fixed side, it's a higher risk, higher project, and you can manage to it accordingly. Whereas if some of the areas around more flexible on this side, it's a lower risk project because you have more flexibility around budget, schedule, and scope and resources. So this is where between those things, you can start to work through how you deliver the project and how you make decisions. So for example, when you're working through some of these, it also makes a lot of sense to Run this by your steering committee, get their input on the budget, schedule, and scope. Because when you make decisions on scope, for example, you have a question on the scope. As a result, what's the change in scope might have an impact on the budget. So you can go to your steering committee and say, hey, we're making a change on scope, but as a result, this may impact the budget. What do you want to do? Here's my suggestion as lead of the project. Get a decision from the sponsors and then note that decision. So I love using success slides. I think they're an awesome tool for working through decisions and getting decisions quickly, because one of the biggest things I learned around ERP projects is decision making will slow down the project over and over again. So hopefully that was useful in that tool. I've used it many times. I love this. It's really useful to use when you're working through project decisions. But let's talk about the project team. Again, the final chapter in how you set up your ERP project for success. You want to make sure you have the right technology project team for your ERP. So ERPs, yes, by definition, are a technology project. They very much have a huge business change. So there is a technology team which needs to have business representation. So let's break it down into this star team that you need to have on this ERP technology project. So first, of course, you have the project manager who's going to lead the project, make sure it goes well, who's accountable for the delivery, who's going to pull together all the different resources and ultimately report up to the sponsor on delivery of that project. That's where the project manager comes in. Then, of course, the sponsor, and I've put sponsor singular because you need one sponsor. The amount of times I see projects where they have two sponsors, and that can create confusion, because who do you go to for that decision making? If there's a choice of what to do, who makes that final decision? I've seen, for example, IT and business sponsors co-sponsoring a project. That only works when you have one person has the final say. Typically, it's the IT sponsor, because they are in charge of the budget. So we have the final decisions rest with the IT, but they obviously have the business sponsor has a huge influence on that as well. But either way, you have one clear decision maker. Then you have a technical lead. We talked about integrations earlier. That's why the technical lead is so important, to make sure we bring in the integrations. And plus then you have the testing, the quality, the rollback plan, the cutover plan. There's a huge technical component. And so you've got a technical lead, and they might have a team below them as well, which includes the vendor as well. So that technical component on how to make sure this technical cutover of your ERP goes well has to fall into your technical lead. But technical lead can only be successful if they know what the business needs. And that's where the business lead comes in. So the business lead represents the functional changes, what's going to work well in terms of the business processes, who can validate the data to make sure it's good, who can do it, give a second pair of eyes on the change management. So the change management is a very important role, which is on the project team. So the business lead would help with that change management aspect. Again, they represent the business. They're the voice of the business, the users, to make sure the project's delivering something that they can use. And ultimately, it's not going to cause more problems when you go live. And then lastly, the key role that's often missed on ERP projects is that operations lead, the operational support. So these are the people who are going to support the ERP once it goes live. The project team typically disbands after go live, after the warranty. Sometimes some of the project team transitions into the operations support team, but a lot of the time it's handed over to a dedicated operations team. So they need to be involved all the way through. Do not leave it to the very end for the last month of the project to then bring them up to speed on the project. Get them involved early, all the way from requirements and the blueprinting through design, the build, and then in testing as well. Have them involved in and aware of the testing. Keep them informed on all the communications and the team building events, and more importantly, step by step throughout the cutover and go live. Then they have a much smoother transition when they're involved up front. So by the time of go live, they're still typically first point of call with the project team in close support, but they can handle the problems and any questions that come up much easier, much quicker. So those are the 5 key roles with team members below them that you need on your ERP project to make sure they stand up or a setup for success. So, hope that was helpful. Always enjoy sharing this lesson learned with you. The comments back are always amazing. Love to hear more about what's going on with you and seeing the questions around your hearing on your ERP projects. Reach out at any time. I've got a few dedicated private questions coming there, so I'm going to answer those separately. I'll reach out to you separately. But as always, remember to keep charging ahead with your technology projects. And we're a special bunch because technology is complicated, but we can make it more simple and more straightforward by sharing information like this with each other. And I'll look forward to seeing you in the next Technology Accelerator video.